So the first things we need to consider are basically the definition. What is a strategic capability? One of the strategic capabilities is to actually take the things that you're good at and the things that you can do and the resource you have access to, etc., bringing them together, get some picture of what it is you're actually capable of. So it's called a capability. The ability of the organisation to fulfill its functions is derived from its strategic capabilities. In turn, capabilities are derived from the organisation's resources, physical and tangible, and its competencies. So what do we mean by resources? Well, there's a number of different sorts of resources we look at. There are the tangible resources, which are the resources that are physical assets in an organisation. So it could be granted to the organisation. If you're a public organisation, it could be, for instance, the ships, the planes. It could be that you're given. It could be the buildings you're given. It could be like the travel, the things that you're doing. All the sorts of things that you can't actually really, you can physically hold and physically touch. But there are also the non-physical assets granted to the organisation, to the public. These could be stuff like public trust, public support, having the company behind you, having the country behind you, all these sort of things. And of course, there are the human resources that you gain, the skills of those you're employed by, perhaps the people you're involved in your diplomatic missions, or people you're trained for your ambassadors, but also all sorts of other things, the skills of your employee. There are also important to realize that there are two types of resources that operate. And this is the same with competence when we look at those. There are threshold resources, and threshold resources are the ones you have to be in business. So, for instance, like something like a big oil company like British Petroleum will have lots of resources, but to be an oil company, a threshold resource is oil. You cannot be an oil company if you do not have access to oil. But there can be a lesson in there here, though, as whether it's worth spending a lot of money improving the quality of some of your threshold resources, because it may well be that once you've got the threshold, it's no longer needed. Obviously, an oil company always wants to get access to more resources, more oil resources, maybe other oil resources that actually it already has enough of. So, for instance, if the public trust to drill in a certain area is reached to the point where you can get planning permission, it might not be worth your effort of actually making greater efforts to win over the public. And there may well be that you've got 51% that support the public. That's enough. That's the threshold resource to do something. You don't need to worry about the 49%. Then you can stop spending money trying to bring those people around, which actually can be to do with that. But there are also unique resources. Now, unique resources give you a clear competitive advantage. Okay, so again, go to the example of BP. Having access to oil is a threshold resource. Without access to oil, you cannot be an oil company. But if a specific contract, for instance, granted by the Saudi Arabian government to drill in a place where oil is cheap and easy to obtain, well, that is a specific advantage that may give you an advantage over others that have access to oil, whose oil may be more difficult to obtain and more expensive to obtain. So that is a real competitive advantage. Alongside the resources, remember the capabilities are made of a combination of resources and competencies. We have competencies. Okay? And a competence can be simply pointed out as the activities and processes which an organisation deploys its resources effectively. So how you may have good resources, but if they're not used correctly, what good are they to yours? So asking for a competency question is, what can the organisation do? Does it meet customer expectations? The private sector strategies are looking to identify where these capabilities lead to advantage over competitors, known as competitive advantages. In the public, non-governmental and not-for-profit sectors, it's perhaps more important that the capabilities of the organisation make it fit for purpose, meeting its objectives within available resources. Also, are customers and the general public satisfied with the service provided? Is it delivering good value for money? These are all questions that need to be set and need to be answered and need to be considered. So I definitely think it would be very important to go on with these. Again, as before, we have threshold competencies, basic requirements for vision of a service or product. And this is often the case of, if you reach the threshold competence, if you actually are capable of doing the minimum, then maybe it's not worth spending more time getting better and better at certain fields. I say, well, we are good enough at this field. Let's concentrate on areas that give us an advantage. And core competencies are primary specifics of what you might be able to do. This. And so, for instance, look at an example of the public sector of this. You look at the British Metropolitan Police. The Metropolitan Police are the police force for London, and they provide all the general skills. And most countries, in Britain, we have a series of police forces scattered around the country, which operate in different geographical regions, provide all the basic skills. But some specialist skills are centralised, and these police forces then have core competencies. So the Metropolitan Police Scotland Yard provides special notifications for all forces countrywide. In fact, for some courses abroad as well. So special branch is the political arm of the police, and the British Transport Police work on the railways. These all have core competencies that go beyond the threshold competencies that are required by the ordinary police force. Finally, what we're looking for is distinctive competencies, something no other organisation can provide. For instance, the UK, the NHS provides services for all illnesses. Whatever your illness is, the NHS is supposed to help and serve you. No private health provider could compete with that. So private health providers who are wishing to get into the public sector in Britain must look to fill niches. They cannot do the whole job. So let's take a look at what is a core competence. A distinctive process that and quite often these emerge over time as a result of refining the processes that exist. So you're just going better and better at something. Maybe you're the first to do it, and other people to start to have a go at doing that process well, but you'll become the best at it. Developing and growing the knowledge of a system, and developing new systems and procedures. So it could be technical, it could be a machine, it could be intangible, it could be a knowledge, it could actually be a process, and there's a procedure and a systematic way of doing things that you and only you have mastered. They're often a combination of leadership style, of products, of corporate cultures, of environments, all these things coming together and combining in a specific way that perhaps you have control over that others don't. A key approach to analysing the internal strengths and weaknesses of the organisation is to identify and evaluate the core competencies. Successful private sector organisations have found their success in a set of competencies that allow them to compete at least equally, if not better than their competitors. Understanding the essential core competencies of the business is seen to be a critical aspect of strategic analysis. Core competencies can be defined as processes that define the organisational capability. They tend to emerge over time as a result of people refining and developing knowledge, systems and procedures. In the public and not-for-profit sectors, it may be that the competitive advantage that is important, but particular skills and abilities are just as important, and they enable best practice to be spread and help the service develop its activities. Competencies might combine leadership style with products and technology, or corporate culture with environment. Organisations could have as core competencies information processing analysis, teamwork, external partnerships and alliance building. These sort of competencies may be very important in not-for-profit or public agencies competing with each other for scarce resources, for human assets and for political advantage. In the private sector, we have some examples of what classes as core competencies. Honda, of course, manufactured cars and motorbikes. Engine design. 3M Corporation, 30,000 products from audio tapes via road signs to medical products. What ties those together? Film adhesives and things like post-it notes, etc. have come out of this thing there. And Canon, a manufacturer of cameras, photocopiers, semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Precision mechanics, microelectronics, fine optics. These are examples of their core competencies. But for it to be useful, a competence must be somewhere you can separate yourself out from the opposition or from the other people operating around you. So to be useful, a core competence must actually be distinctive. And what is it that makes it distinctive? In a competitive environment, the more distinctive the competences are, the less likely they are to be imitated. The concept of core distinctive competencies mean that strategists think of the organisation as a collection of strategic capabilities rather than as a structure containing people and processes. Competencies evolve over time across organisational boundaries. As pointed out by Pralad and Hartmel, unused core competencies imply wasted resources and bounded or restricted innovation. Public sector management is traditionally not strong at being creative and allowing staff to work across boundaries. However, using capabilities to best effect is one of the key lessons of core competence, and therefore the concept seems to be very much at home both the public and not-for-profit sectors. Strategies are designed often to improve on an organisation's weaknesses, to identify the weaknesses in the public sector, and perhaps give themselves an advantage that can be turned these into strength. But how do we make that advantage, if we can get it, into sustainable? Porter and Pralad and Hamel argued for the idea of it to be obtained over time. It should be based on four things: value, rarity, imitability, and organisational. And this will be developed and get better over time. Traditional prescriptive strategy develops the idea of core competences and suggests that the ultimate aim of internal review is to identify a sustainable competitive advantage. That is, what resources and what competencies can give an organisation advantage over competitors that can be sustained over time. If an organisational capability becomes a sustainable competitive advantage, it must be valuable. Is the firm able to exploit an opportunity or neutralize an external threat with the resource capabilities that actually give you something that you can't get otherwise? Rarity. Is the control of the resource, the capability in the hands of a relative few? Is it something that other people cannot easily get their hands on? Doing that. Imitability. Is it difficult to imitate? And will there be a significant cost disadvantage to a firm trying to obtain, develop, or duplicate this resource or capability? And organizational. Is the firm organized, ready, and able to exploit the resource capability? It's also argued that, in fact, what they should also be is dynamic. Often, that means that they develop over time. They do not stand still. So this dynamism is key to them. And Google is often put forward as an example of someone who's gained a major sustainable advantage and has kept developing it, and it's kept it dynamic over time. There is a danger, though, and that danger is that they become core rigidities. That you actually start to say, this is what we're good at, this is what makes us better, and so you do not change them because you say it's too much of a risk. And it can lead to something strategic drift where you keep doing the same thing over and over again because it is what you are used to. Do not wish to change it. While this concept might not seem immediately relevant to organisations which are not working in competitive environments, the concept has been very important in management thinking for 25 years or more. As a result, many large public sector organisations have searched for economies of scale, reducing costs by combining units of bulk purchasing, reorganisation and delaying of management structures, review to stripping out management costs, and outsourcing of support services, contracting cleaning, IT support, transport and distribution service. These actions can be seen as mirroring the activities of private sector managers, aiming to maintain their sustainable competitive advantage. So how do we identify capabilities? Well, there are a number of tools that have been made available for that. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because you can find information about these in many books, textbooks, and in the readings we gave you. There's the value chain analysis. One can be an activity chain, which is obviously in order, or an activity map where things are linked together. Linked to the idea of competitive advantage is an analytical tool called the value chain, which is a diagrammatic way of reviewing the value of the function of an organization, including both primary and support activities. It can help managers identify clusters of activities providing particular benefit to customers. It highlights activities that are less efficient and requires managers to think about the role of such activities. Primary activities, support activities, inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, services and the like. Additions like maintenance contracts. That. There's be severe support activities, procurement systems, technology, HRM systems, infrastructure, NHS local government. Johnston et al., which is on the right reading list, have shown value chains for separate organizations can begin to create a value network. This concept is particularly appropriate for looking at multi-agency services across several public sector organizations. So you may want to think, how does you, as an organization relating to Africa, create a value network, an activity map of all the things that are linked together? There are other alternatives. They're possibly using benchmarking, which compares organizations, similar organizations perhaps, but also organizations doing something simple. So, for instance, one aim in benchmarking has been to compare a surgery, a set of people performing surgery, trying to make sure the tools are in the right place and doing the job quickly for wasn't bleed stuff, with the way a Formula One car changes its tyres. But it also is the problem that can actually become quite dangerous if you get hung up on the idea of you're trying to compete to this. So a surgeon might not be as interested in speed, for instance, as a Formula One car changes. But sometimes the best question and the best way of doing internal audit is simply to ask yourself a lot of questions. And that's what we're going to look at now. What sort of questions would you ask yourself to perform a good internal audit?